Instead, I uncovered the secret she'd been hiding for years. When I showed her the tattoo from Blackridge Tattoo, she went pale. My wife understood. I know everything. It was a Friday evening. I sat at my laptop, thinking about my wife's upcoming birthday. With a little over a week to go, I wanted to give her something truly special. 5 years ago, I helped Vivian open her first interior design studio. Then came a second, then a third. Over time, it grew into a thriving network. I mostly stayed out of her affairs. Now and then I'd put money in when an expansion called for it. But the day-to-day was all Vivian. Last year, I gifted her an expensive designer chair from a famous collection. She was over the moon. Now, I figured I'd track down that same supplier to see what else they carried. I opened her purchase history and scrolled through the orders. Among the usual line items, textiles, premium furniture, contractor fees, one vendor completely didn't belong. Tattoo studio equipment, chairs, professional gear, inks. The total, $21,840. I frowned, staring at the screen. It made no sense. A miscategorized invoice. A one-off mistake? Maybe, but I couldn't look away. As far as I knew, Vivian had absolutely nothing to do with the tattoo industry. In 5 years, she'd never mentioned it once. I sat in the quiet room, watching the cursor blink. I needed an explanation. Vivian got home a little after 8. She dropped her bag by the door, kicked off her shoes, said something about a long day with a difficult client. Same as any other evening. I waited until she'd poured herself a glass of wine and sat down. Then I asked, "Hey, I was in the purchase history. There's a payment in there for tattoo studio equipment. 20 grand, something like that. What's that about?" She thought for a second. Then she shrugged. "I don't remember. One of the commercial projects, probably. We buy equipment through middlemen sometimes, for a client's fit-out. I'll look tomorrow." And right away she was on to something else. Her sister, a trip she wanted to take in the fall, what we should do for her birthday. And honestly, it worked. It was a reasonable answer. Her studios did all kinds of commercial spaces. Maybe somebody really was opening a tattoo parlor and she'd handled the order. People buy strange things through their businesses all the time. I let it go. We had dinner. We watched something. By the time we went to bed, I'd half forgotten about it. But it didn't quite leave me alone. I lay there in the dark, and that one little pause kept coming back. $20-some thousand is not a number you forget. So once she was asleep, I went back down to the laptop and pulled up that vendor again. And I saw that the payment hadn't been the only one. At first, everything looked normal. Routine orders, contractor invoices. But soon, I noticed a strange thing. The exact same company kept appearing in the records over and over again. Each time the amount was different. A few thousand here, a little more there. On its own, no single payment looked like anything. That was the part that got to me later, how ordinary each one looked by itself. But I opened a blank page and started writing them down, one under the other, going back as far as the records went. When I finally added them up, I sat back in the chair. Over the last 2 years, tens of thousands of dollars had gone to that one company. Real money. Money I'd handed over myself. Every time she said the business needed more. The name meant nothing to me. I'd never heard her say it. Never seen it on a contract. Nothing. So I looked it up. There wasn't much to find. No website. No reviews. No listing. No photos of an office. For a company that had moved that kind of money, there was almost nothing. The registration came back to an address in a quiet suburb outside the city. Not a commercial unit, not a showroom. A house. A regular family home on a regular street. And the owner listed on the company was Vivian. Not the studios. Not our shared accounts. A separate company, in her name alone, that I had never once heard her mention. Run, on paper, out of a house I'd never seen. I read the address twice. Then I wrote it down and put the note in my pocket. I sat on it for a couple of days. The address was in my pocket the whole time, and it was all I could think about. On Wednesday, I told Vivian I had to run out to the suburbs to see a supplier. She didn't even look up. "Drive safe," she said. The address took me about 40 minutes out of the city. I expected an office, maybe a little warehouse. It wasn't. It was a house. A big one, clean lines, fresh landscaping. A car sat in the driveway. No company sign, just a home. I parked across the street and a little down, where I could see it without sitting right on top of it. I didn't have a plan. I just wanted to see the place behind the company Vivian had never told me about. I'd been there maybe 20 minutes when the garage door went up. A man came out. Young, a lot younger than me, mid-30s, easy in the way he moved, like the house was his and he had nowhere to be. He climbed into a pickup. When he backed out and rolled past me, I saw the logo on the door. Blackridge Tattoo. I pulled out my phone right there in the truck. It took about 2 minutes. Blackridge Tattoo, a chain of tattoo studios, several locations, owned by a man named Ryan Blackridge. His photo was on the site. It was him, the man from the garage. At least one thing finally made sense. The tattoo equipment wasn't a mistake, wasn't some mix-up. It was real, and somehow my wife was tied to the man who owned it. But that only opened a worse question. The company that paid for it was in my wife's name. She'd told me she didn't remember it. I drove home trying to understand what the hell was going on. And soon I had answer. I called one of the Blackridge Tattoo Studios and booked an appointment. I told them I wanted their best guy, Ryan Blackridge himself. They said he didn't take many new clients anymore, but they'd fit me in. Friday afternoon. The studio was clean and bright, music low, his work framed on the walls. He came out and shook my hand like we were old friends. Before I sat down, I quietly switched on the recorder on my phone and slipped it into my pocket. He never had a reason to think twice about it. He was easy to get talking. While the needle was going, he told me everything. Proud of what he'd built, new locations opening, business growing, big plans for the year ahead. I asked the kind of questions a curious stranger asks, and he filled the rest in himself. Just finished a place out of town, too, he said, smiling, working. Me and my woman finally moved in. I kept my voice level, said that sounded nice. And right then my eyes landed on a photo propped on the desk beside us. Ryan and Vivian, arms around each other, standing in the doorway of that house. The same house I'd parked across from 3 days before. For a few seconds I just looked at it. That her? I asked. He nodded, still smiling, needle moving. Yeah, my woman. He had no idea what he'd just said. Didn't see my face change. Didn't know the man in his chair was her husband, sitting still while a stranger called her his. A few minutes later I paid, thanked him, and walked out. I drove home a different man than the one who'd driven over. For a while I just sat in the truck in my own driveway, going over it again and again. The photo, the doorway, my woman. It wasn't a guess anymore. It was just the truth. It was time to act, but carefully. I knew exactly what would happen if I moved too fast. The second Vivian figured out I knew, time would start working in her favor. She'd have days, maybe just hours, to quietly move things around, pull money out, cover every track. I wasn't about to hand her that window. So instead of making a scene, I went and found the right people. Lawyers who knew how this worked. We needed to understand exactly how those hidden assets were set up and lock everything down before she ever saw it coming. Fast, quiet, no drama. I just wanted back what I'd been funding with my own money for years. A week later it all came down at once. No warning. On a Tuesday morning the house out in Bend and Ryan's studios were frozen, locked up tight, nobody able to touch them. The accounts behind that second business went cold the same hour. Everything they'd built together, still in the air a day before, suddenly out of reach for both of them. I was home when it happened. I'd taken the day. I made coffee and waited, because I knew the call was coming. It came a little before 10. Vivian, and I could hear it in the first word, the panic, fast and high. Russ, the studio accounts are locked. I don't understand. Nothing's working. What is going on? I kept my voice flat. Come home, I said. I'm here. Come home now. She started asking again, and I just said it once more and hung up. It took her about an hour. I heard the car come in too fast, the door, then she was inside. Pale, coat half off, phone still gripped in her hand like it might start working again if she held it long enough. Russ, what is happening? Talk to me. I was sitting in the chair I'd been sitting in all morning. Calm. I'd had a week to get ready for this. She'd had an hour. I know, Vivian, I said. I know everything. She went still. Completely still, the way you do when the floor isn't where you thought it was. I stood up slowly and pulled up my sleeve. Look at the tattoo I got, I said. From Ryan Blackridge. The color left her face. All of it at once. She stared at the ink on my arm like it was something that couldn't exist. And here's the two of us talking, I said. Have a listen. I pressed play on my phone. Ryan's voice came into the room, warm, easy, proud. The growing chain. The 2 new locations coming. The place he'd just finished out of town. My woman, he said. finally moved in together, his voice filling our living room while Vivian stood there and listened to him talk about her. Her lips were trembling. I let it run a few seconds longer, then shut it off. I had someone go through the studios, I said. 2 years, Vivian. 2 years you moved my money out. You bought that house. You set up a second company in your name. You opened tattoo studios for the man you're sleeping with. Every time you told me it was for the business, you were building your other life. Behind my back. She started in, that I had it wrong, that there was an explanation, that if I'd just let her. Don't, I said. I stood across the street from your house. I saw the photo of the two of you on his desk. I don't believe a word out of you anymore. She lowered herself into a chair like her legs had quit. You used all of it, I said, even in quiet. My trust, my love, my money. You never once flinched when you asked for more. You looked me in the eye and asked me to pay for the house you'd live in with him. She didn't say anything. I kept going. It's already done. The house, the studios, the accounts, all locked this morning, so you can't sign anything over to Ryan. You don't get to touch any of it. And I've filed. The divorce papers will reach you soon. I stood up and walked out. What came after was slower and quieter than people imagine. There was no shouting match, no big day in court like in the movies. My lawyers laid it all out plainly, where the money had come from, where it had gone, and whose name sat on everything in between. It wasn't hard to follow once it was on the table. I had paid for every bit of it, and the records said so. In the end, it went the way they told me it would. The house out in Bend and the whole Blackridge tattoo chain were handed to me, bought with my money, so returned to me. On paper, the dream Vivian and Ryan had built together now belonged to the husband neither of them had counted on. I didn't want any of it. I never set foot in that house to live in it. I had no interest in running tattoo studios, no interest in standing in the middle of the life they'd planned. So I put all of it up for sale, the house, the studios, every piece. I wasn't trying to own their dream. I just wanted my money back, and then I wanted it gone. It sold off over the following months. I didn't go to a single walkthrough. I let the lawyers handle the closings and watched the funds come back, one wire at a time, into accounts that were only mine again. The strange thing was how little I felt watching it happen. I'd expected something, satisfaction, maybe, or anger finally burning off. But mostly it was just quiet. A thing being put back the way it should have been all along. And somewhere out in Bend, an empty house with a sign in the yard, and her name no longer on a single thing in it. I cut Vivian off completely. Not all at once, though. For a while she kept trying. She'd call, she'd text, she'd show up wanting to talk, wanting to fix it, wanting to start over. One more chance, she said. We could begin again. It turned out Ryan had vanished the moment the house and the studios and the money were gone. She told me that herself, sitting at my kitchen table one last time. The second there was nothing left to live off, he was done. He'd never been building a life with her. He'd been building one for himself, on her, and underneath her on me. A younger man with a good smile, and she'd handed him everything, right up until there was nothing left to hand over. So now, with nothing in her hands, she came back to me. Not because anything had changed in how she saw me, only because there was nowhere else to go. I listened to her, and the thing that surprised me was that I felt nothing. Not anger, not bitterness, no need to prove anything or make her hurt. I looked across the table and saw a stranger. Somebody I'd shared a house and 17 years with and didn't know at all. I told her that, plainly. No speeches, no blame. I said whatever we'd had was gone, that I wasn't angry anymore, and that I needed her not to come back. Then I asked her to leave. The divorce went through fast. There wasn't much left to argue over. She'd seen to that herself, long before I ever found that first strange payment. We never saw each other again, and I never went looking. I went back to my company on a Monday morning, same as any other. The house was quiet, and it was mine. For the first time in years, every dollar I made was building my own life, and nobody else's. That was the end of it. I hope this story didn't leave you indifferent. Do you think Russ acted fairly toward